One of the most august environmental bodies, the United Nations Environment Programme, put out a global alert last year, basically saying that the industry will have unavoidable environmental impacts. Some of them will occur when the technology is not used correctly. Others will occur even if the technology is used correctly, which really basically says you cannot regulate this industry into safety. You cannot regulate away all the risks. And the things that they're concerned about are very similar to ours: water resources, contamination, negative impacts on human health, biodiversity, competition for soil land. The chemical issues where my real interest is, of course. And we often focus on fracking fluids, but completely forget that there are drilling fluids. And when you drill 1,000 wells, it's a little bit different to drilling that one single well that you do with conventional gas. And you will often hear, well, first off, the drilling fluids are just as potent, they're just as toxic as many of the fracking fluids. But you'll often hear the industry say, it's so dilute, do not worry, it's less than 2% of the water we put down. When you actually look at the industry documentation, what that translates to, in the case of coal bed methane, about 18.5 tonnes, 18,500 kilograms of chemical down the well, each frac, each well. For shale, the one that we were able to get our hands on was about 8 to 16 tonnes of chemical additive. We knew we were in the right ballpark because the EU talk about 16 tonnes of acute toxics for tight gas fracking. So it's around that 15 to 18 tonnes. It's quite a significant amount of chemical. And of that, about 50% remains in the ground. It doesn't come back up. Many of them have acute and chronic exposure, symptoms associated with them. Very few have any environmental fate data or ecotox data, so we simply don't know what happens when you put them into the ground. And so we really are dealing with this unassessed mixture of carcinogens and neurotoxins. I popped those up, I don't expect you to read them, but it just gives you an idea that these are not the sort of chemicals you will find in your kitchen cupboard or under the sink in the bathroom, which again is what we get told constantly by industry. These are serious toxins, serious industrial chemicals that you do not want to be exposed to. Just as important as what they put down is what they release. Natural contaminants like BTEX, benzene, toluene, ethylbenzene and xylene, volatile organic compounds, heavy metals, naturally occurring radioactive materials, all things that are found in the ground and are quite safe when they remain in the ground, but not when they are released by the process. And of course flaring, that's what a flare looks like. Wherever there is a gas field, there will be flares. As the head of iGas just said recently in the media, it's not a case whether we will or we won't flare, it's just simply industry practice. And so those things put off huge amounts of aerial pollution, so much so that the US EPA has banned them after 2015. That is not a ban that's going to occur either in the UK or Australia. I don't know about Ireland, but I doubt so. Chemicals are okay if you're not exposed to them, if there's not pathways for exposure, but the industry provide wonderful pathways for exposure. Through the problem of produced water, what do you do with this incredible amount of produced water that the industry produces? It's contaminated. In Australia, that's one of the things we do with it. In America, they do that too. They basically spray it on dust roads to suppress dust, which, as you can imagine, when the dust dries, you're back to the same problem, except you've got contaminated dust. The industry, they'd like to put it in ponds. Ponds, I gather, are going to be illegal in the UK. Again, I'm not sure what's going to happen in Ireland. So there are many other ways you can be exposed, and I will just rush through this a bit because I know it's a short one. But hydraulic fracturing and the unintentional fractures and venting of gases are important ways. I like to use this permit. This is a permit for treated wastewater, and I do stress treated. And as you can see, this is an 18 months. It's gone and finished. It's over and done with. The damage has happened. But if you look at the cumulative load on the far column, over that 18-month period, you can see how much tonnage of chemical goes into that waterway. They are all legal release rates. It wasn't as if the company was doing anything illegal. That's a regulated process. So here's some of the evidence from Australia. Just first off, that's what's called a blowout. That happened west of Sydney. It blew for about 5 hours, spurting at some chemicals everywhere. The industry will tell you it doesn't happen. Well, obviously it does, because there's a wonderful photo of it. But anyway, the impacts on water. The US EPA released a 2011 study, but they didn't release it until late last year because of industry pressure, where they investigated 23 drinking water wells. They tested for a range of chemicals associated with drilling and hydraulic fracturing, found many of them in the aquifers the aquifers that were used for domestic water supply. In Queensland, the industry had to acknowledge that out of 14 of their monitoring wells around one small gas field, 5 were contaminated with BTEX, and benzene was at 6 and 15 times the Australian drinking water standard. Again, that was industry's own data. I was involved in a study that looked at the wellhead 24 hours after it was fracked, when the flow back starts to come bubbling back. And we picked up a range of volatile organic compounds, semi-volatile and heavy metals and benzene. And that bore that I showed you at the beginning that was burning, it was tested by the industry and sure enough had both methane and toluene in the bore. Again, industry's published data. And then there's a very important US National Academy of Science study which showed that if you lived within a kilometre of a shale gas well, you had a much greater risk of having methane in your water, up to 60 times. Similar thing, impacts on air. You often hear, look, if they don't frack, it's not going to be a problem. The Colburn study that was released last year showed, she did a air monitoring over a 12-month period, monitored literally every day. And what she showed was that the highest levels of air pollution were happening during the initial drilling, not the fracking. So when they say we're just going to come in and do a little bit of exploratory work, we're just going to do some drilling, that is of as much concern as the hydraulic fracturing. And certainly the Colburn study found many very hazardous air pollutants. In our own area, the Queensland Tara gas fields, there was a very important study from Southern Cross University where they have shown that for radon, carbon dioxide and methane, the levels are 3 times higher within the gas fields than outside the gas fields. A good relationship, a significant relationship with the number and the proximity of wells, but they have also shown how the actual gases are moving through the soil structure into the air because of the disturbances of the pressure, because of the removal of the produced water for the coal bed methane. And we were involved in some air sampling around that Tara estate where a lot of people live, or 38 families live. It's sort of small rural holdings. People have moved there hoping to find their little bit of paradise. Instead, they found air pollution and some illness, which I'll just mention in a sec. That study, the testing has been done by government, industry and ourselves, and we've all found exactly the same results. So again, it really highlights what this industry can do for air pollution. We've also picked up chlorofluorocarbons, freon 1,1 and 1,3, which were chemicals banned under the ozone work done in the 80s. We're not suggesting the industry is using these chemicals illegally. We suggest that they are being made as byproducts because of what is going into the earth. And the Queensland government did a wellhead safety program where they found 120 of 400 wells was leaking methane. The photo there is of the Condamine River, and I've got a better one here, which is simply bubbling methane. About 6 or 7 months ago, there has been fracking, not really close, but within a couple of kilometres of it. The river started to bubble methane. It now bubbles methane along quite a long kilometre stretch, number of kilometres. We believe that the base of the river has been, the integrity of the base of the river has been breached, hence why these bubbles. Again, industry and government said it's all very natural, but the farmers who farmed along there for all their life and all their parents' life say they have never seen it before, and these are quite significant levels of methane. So I'll just end on some health impacts, which I think is where a lot of this leads us to, the real impact of this industry, which is on public health. US in 2012, McKenzie published a paper in the US, which is the only proper risk assessment ever done for this industry, and it showed that if you lived within a half a mile of a well, you had a greater risk of neurological and respiratory problems and a greater excess lifetime cancer risk. However, if we come closer to home and we go back to that same Queensland Tara community, of the 38 households, 60 are showing symptoms. This is adults and children. They sound not serious symptoms, but these are severe headaches, severe nosebleeds, severe paresthesia, to the point where we actually were able to force the Queensland government into doing a health report. And although it was reported as clean bill of health for coal bed methane, actually the report said that there was some evidence that some of the residents' symptoms were being caused by some of the contaminants from the wells. These symptoms are very, very similar to a Pennsylvania study, which was on shale, which gives you an idea that when it comes to air pollution, they're pretty much on par. And the Pennsylvania study also showed it was affecting animals and livestock as well. The chinchilla one, I think, is an interesting one. That was a group of farmers who had noxious smells, noxious odours around their farms. They complained to the industry because they were having breathing difficulties. The industry turned up and offered them a air conditioner and a confidentiality agreement. And good Australian style, they told them what they could do with both of them, which quite isn't repeatable. One of the big things about the Queensland Health Study, which I was incensed about, was the fact that it gave no credit to the fact that children are not little adults. They have special vulnerabilities, they are specially sensitive to chemicals, and we had a number of children on that site. There is a wonderful doctor called Geraldine McCarran, I'm hoping to meet her sister at some stage here in Ireland, who was so incensed about that study she has carried out her own. She is particularly concerned about the children. There are 17 under the age of 5. They have a range of symptoms, and some of them are quite extraordinary symptoms. Most of them look very neurotoxic linked, and she is particularly worried about these.